over 1.5 years of experience with oil and gas application and problem solving using Python. He worked on numerous full-scale to mini-scale projects, ranging from core reservoir engineering concepts through drilling engineering concepts to oil production engineering and numerical simulation using Python and its packages. Mr. Vyas actively maintains a GitHub repository for oil and gas data analysis and machine learning and deep learning to help and mentor the community with whatever he learns. Before starting our session, I would like to mention you that you can ask your questions using the chat box, and please make sure to mute your mic in order not to disrupt our speaker. And from now, the mic is definitely yours, Mr. Vyas. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for the lovely introduction. I hope everyone's doing fine. And just give me a heads up if I'm audible. Am I audible, right? I'm audible. Can you hear me?
Yes, we are hearing you very well.
Okay, fine. Okay, so I see a lot of people joining in. So I'm really glad that everyone's giving in their time to learn Python, and the group of attendees. I see seniors, I see people who are in their college right now, and I'm really happy that I can try to speak in front of a diverse crowd. So I'm really happy, I have been introduced already. I'm Divyanshu Vyas, and I'm almost completing my master's this year. And I'll be working in this data analytics domain. I have been working with Python and data analytics since 1.5 or 2 years. And I have been actively participating in various projects over the last 1 year. So today's session, without any ado, I will just introduce about how we will try to go about this great initiative, like an internship setup that you guys have kept up. So I'll start session by session. We will gradually move towards, because we have a diverse crowd, keeping everyone on the same page. We will bit by bit move towards the epitome, move towards machine learning. Our main target through this internship is to have a really nice and decent understanding about machine learning, apply it to a few projects. But to do that, we'll have to move gradually. We'll start with understanding about Pythons today. We'll start with basic projects. We'll start with basic understanding of Python. Then we will move on towards data analysis topics. We will understand what kind of tools there are to do data analysis. Then we will do visualizations, both static and dynamic visualizations. I'll try to talk about, and I'll instruct how to create widgets. I'll talk about how to create dynamic visualizations, the visualizations that you can play with. And once we learn all these data analysis and data visualizations tool, I'll finally talk about the popular and the very practical machine learning applications and algorithms there are. Having understood that, we will finally conclude and move towards applying all our understanding of Python, data analysis, and machine learning to real world projects, which can do about petroleum engineering and cannot, like on general data sets as well as on real core data sets. So in order to apply it, we can apply, but after this internship, we can apply to the machine learning concepts to whatever data set we have in our hands, right? So I'll just share my screen and get going with today's session. So please let me know once you see my screen. Okay. Yep. Is my screen visible?
Yes, now it is.
Okay, perfect. So as I have already discussed, we will be starting with our basic session on Python for petroleum engineers. Just a slight, just not to scare you guys, whatever I will be talking about today, for whoever who is new to Python, totally new to Python, it might feel like it's going over the head, but don't worry, you will have a few days after this session, and I will share the link to entire code notebook after this session, so that you can go back and see whatever has been taught, and it is really easy to understand. Okay, so the agenda for today's session would be, I'll start talking about data types in Python. Then I'll talk about how we can work and play around with these data types with operators and statements. Like we use pen and paper to write equations, right? We use pen and paper to do multiple things. How can we do something like that in Python that can be dealt with in operators and statements? Then if in case there is something which is requiring us to have multiple attempts at a singular task, it's like a monotonous task we have to do 100 times again and again. It's like we have to go back, fill the bucket, come back, throw the bucket, go back, fill the bucket again, and then keep doing the bucket filling task again and again. So we wish something would help us do this like in an automatic manner. So that's something that we will look at after this thing in loops and iterations. Then we go forward and do functions. We understand, which is very important for today's lecture. It is one of the most important topics in Python because this makes you a mature programmer. And after we conclude all that, we are basically ready for whatever is required to do and move on towards data analysis as a Python engineer. We will surely do 2 to 3 projects today, and then I'll leave you with something that you can do on your own. Okay. So like always, let's start with a bit of introduction about why do we need as a student, basically. For those who are already in the professional field, they already know a lot. But for a student, what good does Python do to you? First up, compare yourself solving things using hand and calculator, and then compare yourself solving things in Python. First thing is it sounds really cool if you're doing that in Python, but that does not get you a job. You have a technical edge. That's more important. You have a technical edge over other people who are doing it the same old manner by using pen and paper. But once you do, for example, everyone as a petroleum engineer, they are taught numerical methods as a subject. They are taught reservoir simulation as a subject back in grad school. Now most of the students, they do this entire subject or the course using pen and paper. They understand the concepts really well, they apply the concepts, but they apply it on pen and paper. That does not help in clearly having a proof of concept, right? You need something that gives you an edge over the other people in the industry on a global level. Python will help you do that. You can do reservoir simulation and you can do various finite difference method codes in Python, as we will see a few examples in this course. You will see how you can do that in Python, and you will feel confident about the subject that you are currently understanding. Reservoir engineering is totally doable in Python, and everything that you do in Python becomes a part of your resume. And once that becomes a part of your resume, it gives you a great edge towards other people in the industry. That being said, oil and gas industry is very new to the data science domain as compared to other industries. The data science and machine learning applications has been applied to a lot of other, like you use Facebook, right? And you see people, you upload a picture and Facebook suggests you that, hey, you might want to tag this person in this picture. That's pure machine learning. That's a pure, like, machine has understood that this image looks someone like this. Various examples of machine learnings already exist, but in oil and gas, this application is fairly new. So if in case you learn machine learning in Python and applications, you are giving a great boost. It's like a catalyst in your career. Then the future of the industry, of course, because we are moving towards more and more efficient solutions, that gives you an opportunity to use data and provide solutions to the industry. And given that it is fairly new, you have a lot of opportunities coming up. A lot of startups are coming up. I can also name a few, but you can find them on LinkedIn yourself. A lot of startups pertaining with oil and gas, machine learning projects, and services are coming up, and they are looking for people who are smart and promising in terms of these things. So for someone who plans, also, that being said, this was all about oil and gas, but for someone who in the future wants to diversify and move into other prospects, let's say healthcare or product companies or something, this domain is such that it's like mathematics. Math is not a chemistry math or a physics math. Math is math. You can apply mathematics to anything. So that makes it very like a smooth transition, very viable. You can transition to any industry, name it. You can transition. You are not just not a petroleum engineer after you do this course. You are someone who can step into any domain. So that is motivation which is good enough to move on and pay more attention to this course than it was before. And yes, last but not the least, all these points come to this final point. Number of opportunities, they will shoot up indefinitely, like they will shoot up significantly. I also wrote a post on LinkedIn as a proof of this thing. Back in days, my LinkedIn job alert was set to a petroleum engineering job. I used to get 1, 2 job requirements daily or in a month or something. But as soon as I kept the job alert to a data analyst or a data scientist position, every day I get 90 to 100 job alerts. So that is the amount of opportunities that you will be exposed to once you do this course. So that is enough motivation and philosophies. Let's get to the course. Anything that I'm teaching today can be followed by this link. It is already there on GitHub. You will find that. So let's start with Python for data science as a petroleum engineer. Let's get to it. The first topic today is data types. Uh, Guys, whatever I'm doing in Google Colab. So if in case you want to use Google Colab, you can just type Colab and you will find Google. This is the spelling, and it just connects to your Gmail account and you can use it, right? And you will find the notebook like this kind of code area. You can use it there. Okay, it needs no installment, nothing. You just have to go and use it. All right. So the first topic today, the chapter 1 of this presentation is data types, whatever data types they exist in Python. So in data types, let's start with numbers and mathematical operators. Very important. This is simple. 1 plus 1 gives 2. Once you type any command in Python in this, it's called a code cell. In order to run it, either you can press on this play button or you can do shift and enter. That runs it. Okay, 1 plus 1 becomes 2. 1 minus 1 becomes 0. 1 by 2 becomes 0.5. Pretty straightforward. This is multiplication. I hope you recall these numbers. These are very familiar numbers as a petroleum or a reservoir engineer. This is how you round. For example, I just don't want all these digits. I can put this operation inside a round function. Suppose I have this number 2.30333333. Now I just want to round it up to the third decimal place. How can I do it? Let's do it. Okay. So I put it into a round function, round. And I just, one more thing I have to provide. While you type it, Google Colab already suggests you that the function, the theory about the function. So all you have to provide is first the number and the number of digits you have to round it up to. So I have to, let's say, round it up to the third decimal place. So it gives me 2.303. Let's say I have to round it up to the fifth decimal place. It gives me 2.30333. And that's how it goes. Okay. So that's about the round function. What if you want to raise a particular number to a particular power? What if you want to square a number? In Python, you cannot square a number using this symbol. Rather, you have to square it using the double asterisk, okay, double star marks. So you just go it and you do it. Suppose I want to square root of a number. I want to take a square root. Okay, suppose I have 625 as a number and I want to square root it. So I just do 0.5 and you can see it gives me 25, right? Suppose if you want to find out the remainder of a number, this is the percentage symbol gives you, it's called the modulus operator. 5 modulus 2 gives you the remainder that you get after you divide 5 by 2. Okay, so 1 is the modulus. It is very helpful in cases where you want to find out whether a number is an even number or an odd number. If the remainder is 1, that tells you it's an odd number. If the remainder is 0, it's an even number. You can see if I press 4 over here, you can see the remainder is 0. That can be a good check. It can help us check whether there will be a lot of cases where you have to check whether a number is an even or an odd number. So that's exactly what we have done. Then comes the floor division. It's like the quotient while you are dividing, just like kids do. While you are dividing a number by another number, you write a quotient on the top and you have a remainder at the bottom, right? This floor division gives you the quotient of the uh, how do you pronounce it, quotient or anything. So it gives you the quotient of the division, very simple. And this is just a verification what it means. So it's exactly what you do in division, right? 2 multiplied by the quotient plus the remainder gives you the exact number, right? If you are dividing 5 by 2. So it's nothing, you don't need to understand this. It's already very easy. Now coming back to something more important. What if you have done all this progress, you want to store it into a variable? This is how you can do it. In Python, equal to statement does not mean that these two things are equal. Equal to statement means that whatever is stored, written in the right will go and get stored in the left. Okay. It does not mean that phi a and 0.25 are two comparable quantities. That is done in Python using a different operator, which is called double equals to. Okay. Also, one thing to notice, whatever you type after the hash in Python, it does not get executed. It's a comment, basically. Okay. You can see whatever is shown in green, it will be a comment. And comments are not executed in Python. They are more like notes you are writing for yourself. Okay. So what phi a equals to 0.25 means, 0.25 is the porosity, and you are storing that into phi a as a variable. So phi a is nothing but a random variable name I'm giving for, suppose, a reservoir A. Then phi b similarly is 0.35. You cannot do something like 0.2 equals to a. You cannot do it because it does not make sense. How can you assign some value to a number, because a number has its own existence, right? So a already, first thing is that a does not exist in this code, and second thing is, in order to assign it to something, it has to be a variable, right? So it has to be a variable. So suppose I do a equals to 0.2. Now it makes sense because a is now a variable. It's like a bucket in which you can store 0.2. Okay. Moving forward, this is just to display these variables. There are a few rules you need to follow in order to name a variable. One where is not a valid variable name. For example, what if I do 25a? This is my variable name. You can see this will give you an error. Okay, you can see this is giving you an error. I'll just zoom it. Okay, so this is because we are not giving it a, we are not following the rules. So here are a few rules. You cannot start the variable name with a digit. It can be after the a few letters or something. Only special character allowed is an underscore. You can see in this I've used an underscore. But if in case I use let's say $sign, it will give me an error. You can see. So no special characters are allowed. There might be some hidden reason to it. Okay, this I should comment because this is more like an error, right? And it is case sensitive. Capital A is another variable and small a is another variable. They have both different memory locations. Okay, if you have in your code two variables, one starting with capital A and another starting with small a, they are different, right? This is again, ampersand cannot be used as a variable name symbol, right? Moving on, these are all the errors. Next topic is strings data type. Strings, my name is Divyanshu. If I want to store it in a variable, I'll have to use a string data type. Okay, how to use strings? Anything you put inside single quotes or double quotes, they are called strings. Okay, you can see this entire thing, it's a string. But if in case I remove just one thing, it will give me an error because it does not understand what it is. So anything you store inside the two single quotes or two double quotes, it becomes a string, right? And also you can store it in a variable, let's say sentence. Okay, so this becomes a assignment. Why I call it assignment? Because the string on the right hand side of the equation is assigned to whatever variable is on the left hand side of the double equals to sign, not double equals to, but single equals to. How to print a string? You can see this is the print statement. Whatever you provide inside this will be printed as an output. In Jupyter Notebooks, this Colab is also a form of Jupyter Notebook. Whatever is has supposed to be the output is just displayed on the next line itself. There is an input cell and there is an output cell. But in other IDEs, other softwares you use for typing Python code, you might have to do something else. But if your main aim is to go for data science, you start with Colab or Jupyter Notebooks, right? This is something important. /n. What /n does is it ends or breaks the line. Okay, so once you print it like this, wherever it spots a /n, whatever is next to the /n, it starts from the next line. Okay, so this is line 1, and whatever is next to the /n, it starts with line 2. Suppose I want to enter something else, line 3. Let's see. Yeah, you can see it starts. So why it's showing a space? Because after /n you have provided a space. If you don't provide a space, it gives me a line 3. Okay, now let's say we want to print in the print statement. What if we want to print something? We have to use variables. Okay, we have stored data in variables. Let's say name of the rock type in the name variable, and the porosity of that particular rock in porosity variable. Now, what if I want to use these name and porosity variables inside my print statement? I make sure I use the first idea I have is I just go for it. Like the rock type is name and the rock porosity is porosity, and I run it. It does not work. It's not satisfactory because the rock type it should be appearing with sandstone over here and 0.25 over here. So what do we do? In that case, F strings is something which helps us. F strings is a short for formatted strings. Using F strings, it becomes very simple to use variable names inside the print statement. Otherwise, whatever you provide inside the print statement, inside these two double quotes, it is treated like a string. But you don't want things to be treated like a string. Whatever is at this place, we want it to be treated like a variable, which has a particular value, and it's not a string, right? So all you have to do is provide a F just at the starting of the sentence like this, and then wherever you want to provide the variable names, you provide them inside the curly braces. Okay, so you can see I have just added two curly braces next to the variable names. Here is also a variable name. Okay, and once I run it, you can see wherever this variable was there, the curly braces were there. Rather than using it like a string, it has taken the value sandstone from it, and wherever this porosity variable was there, rather than printing the string porosity, it has printed the value of variable porosity. This is the magic of the F string formatting string command, right? So once I run it, suppose I do something like this. Let's say my name is Divyanshu, and my age is 15. Okay, so all you have to do now is the man name, my name is my age, years old. Now you must have already spotted an error over here. I have done everything right. I have used curly braces and variable names inside the curly braces, but it's still not showing me some white kind of thing. Why? Because I'm not providing the F symbol. So once I do it and I run it, the man named Divyas is 15 years old. And that's correct. And that's true. So we move on. There's a property of strings. Strings are immutable. They cannot be modified. Okay. So suppose I have taken the sandstone name. Okay. This is a variable. Suppose I want to change one letter of this name. I cannot do that because strings cannot be modified. Okay. And the error will appear. String object does not support item assignment. Once you have specified a string to a variable, that becomes secure, because Python assumes that names and other things, they are very secure informations you do not want in your program. Who wants to change their program in a span of a code? Who wants to change their name? If I'm Divyanshu at the starting of the code, I will stay Divyanshu even at the end of the code, right? I will not become Divyanshi at the end of the code. So that is why Python does not support, I guess that's a very lame example of why Python does not support item assignment for strings, right? So moving on, next data type. So that completes our understanding about strings as the data type. And that also completes, by now we have looked at numbers and mathematical operators and strings as the data type. Just to keep it clean, moving on, we move on to the lists data type, right? Okay. Now list is a very important subject for today's discussion because it helps you literally. When we talk about data, we want to look for places where we can store data. Suppose I have an Excel sheet and there's a column of data and I only know a bit of Python. I can still store it. Whatever is in the column of the Excel sheet, I can use that data and store it in the form of a list. Yes, it has its drawbacks. I will talk about them later. But right now, let's look at its benefits. Okay. Suppose I have three numbers and they are integers. And rather than storing all of these three numbers in three different places, why not store them in one place? So that is why lists are beneficial. Ints equals to 1, 2, 3. So that helps me because now all these three numbers, they are clumped together in a basket, and that basket is also modifiable in the future. That's what I mean when I say the lists are mutable. but strings are not mutable. You cannot change a string in the future, but you can sure as hell you can change the lists in the future, right? So suppose what I try to do in strings, I try to assign some value to a string, right, at a particular position. That gave me an error in form of strings, but it will not give me an error in form of lists, right? And we will see after we read about list slicing and indexing, we will understand why. Okay. So again, a list of floating point numbers. So this is a list of integers. What if I want to store a list of floats? This is a list of floats. These are very important basics, guys, because once we move on to mature programming, if we don't understand these things clearly, we will not be able to understand why we are getting errors in the larger codes. So these are very tiny bits, but very important bits of information. Lists can also be used to store multiple data types together in a basket. It just does, it's not like if you have a apple basket, you just store apples. And if you have mango basket, you just store mangoes. List is something which does not discriminate. You have a basket, you store apples, you store mangoes, and you store humans in that basket as well. It supports everything, right? So lists also support mixed path. Okay, so and it also supports item assignment, right? So that's how it is. Now, yeah, that's what I have been doing very late. So you can also store it to a variable. Okay. Now we move on to manipulations and operations on lists. You can join two lists together. Okay. What if I want to have a list which has integers and it has floats, right? So I can do that, and I can just what I have to do is I have to do a plus statement, ints and floats. So that becomes a composite list. It has integers list data, it has floats list data, and I can store it into a final list as well. How brilliant is that? So that is more like, what if in the future, I think I don't need separate containers for two kinds of data. I can rather use them inside one sort of data to make things clean and to prevent redundancy. So this operation might be useful in that case. Okay, moving forward, this is the joining of two lists. What if I want to place a new value at the end of the list? What if I want to add A, B, C, and at the end I want to add a D as well? So I can do that. It's called an append statement. An example is, what if this is the new value and I want to append this new porosity at the end of already existing porosities. So already existing porosities are where? Here are the already existing porosities. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4 porosities are there. You want to add one more to the end, which is 0.4, which is new value. You run this, and you can see the porosities have a new value. Okay, you can see. Now, since I had already run this code, rather than preventing confusion, this is the porosities before. And once we do the append, this is the porosities after. So you can see it has a new value at the end. Whatever you provide in the append statement will always be added at the end, not in the front or something. So in order to add at your customized location, there is an add or remove kind of concept or method that you can look at, but it's not important. Mostly I have always used append statement. Okay. Now indexing, it's a most important topic because lists have the flexibility that you can change. Okay, what if some data is incorrect? What if I want to correct it and assign it with something new? It is supported by list. It was not supported by strings, but it is supported by list. I'll give you an example. Okay, look at this list, poro. It has porosities, but you can see 45. Someone has mistakenly placed the percentage form of porosity rather than the fractional form of porosity. You can see every other porosity is in fractions. Someone has placed it in the format of a percentage. So it's incorrect, right? If in case we use it in the future, it will give you incorrect results. So what we need to do is we need to change this value and we need to replace it with 0.45. Okay. Now, one information about lists is lists are indexable. They are sequential. Every value in the list has a particular address. It's called the index of the list. First value has the index of 0. The second value has the index of 1, and then it keeps on going. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So what is stored at the third index? 0, 1, 2, 3. So if I want to, if I just do 0 third, okay, so it will give me whatever is stored at the third index. Okay, so 0, 1, 2, 3. Is it giving me in the third index? Yes, it is, because the counting is starting from 0. Basically, so what I did, it's confusing for some beginners because it starts with 0. So the serial number, you can imagine two things going parallelly. One is the index number and one is the serial number. Okay, so index number 3 is the serial number 4 that ends the story. Index number 3 is serial number 4. Index number 0 is serial number 1. Index number 2 is serial number 3. And whatever we provide inside these square brackets, this is called indexing. It is always the index number, not the serial number. When I say print the porosity 3, it means print the value stored at third index of porosity list and the fourth serial number of porosity list. I hope that's clear. So when I say print poro 0, it means print whatever is at the 0th index of porosity list and the first serial number of the porosity list. When I do it, here it is. You can also do reverse counting. When you start from here, it is the index number -1, -2, -3, -4. So when I do poro -1, it gives me 45. So it starts with 45. If you start with 45, you have -1, then -2 is 27, and that's how it goes, right? You can have nested lists as well. It is more like a two-dimensional matrix, lists stored inside lists. Okay, so this is a 2D list, and which is stored list inside list. Okay, just to check, are there people like okay, these are checks. Okay, I'll look at it. So there are 2D lists stored inside lists. So what if I want to, so this is how it looks like. You can see one is the entire collection of lists, and internal lists are stored like more like items, individual items. What if I want to access 3? Okay, so first I will have to access the first element in this huge superset list. So this is my external list. So this is called the list 2D. And then I access the first list inside, first element inside this list, which is my list itself. And then I access the last element of this internal list, which is done by this -1. So if the list is 2D, you will have to need 2 square brackets, 2 indexes. If your list is 3D, you will need 3 indexes. If your list is 4D, it keeps on going. So that's how it is. So this is about list indexing. Now, what if I just don't want individual value? Rather than that, I want to access multiple values. I want to access a slice of lists, right? A slice of values from a list. So that is, that becomes a slice rather than a singular value. Okay. So you can see this is a long list, and I want to access, let's say, I want to access the value starting from the third index or the fourth serial number. So 0, 1, 2, 3. So this command, it will give me all the values and from this list starting from the third index. So we can enter 3 things in a slice. We can enter the starting index, we can enter the stopping index, and we can also provide the step. Okay, we start at the third index. We can also provide the stopping index. So suppose since we have not provided any other information, we will assume that we want everything towards the end, and we want by default the step size is 1. What if I want up to the second last position? This is my second last position. So I do a start at 3 and end at -2. So you can see 10, 100, 1000, 3, 40, and last one is not included. Just remember that. Last one, when you provide a list, stopping index, that index is not included. What if I provide 1 as the step? So we get the same result. That proves that 1 was the default step. What if I provide 2? Now this is how we can take up alternative positions from the list. So you can see 10 first, then 1000, then 40. You are skipping one value. What if I start from 0? So you can see 4, then 1 is left, then 1, then 1 is left, then 100, then 1 is left, then 3, and so on. Okay. Now what if I provide the step size of 3? Then 2 values will be skipped over. 4, 5, and 1 is left, 10, 100,000 left, 3, and so on. Okay. So this is very important because it helps, it can be used further as well in other data types, in NumPy arrays, in pandas. This concept of slicing is huge. It's magical. It will be used forever. Okay. So please look back and revise this concept as we go on. Next data type. So lists were very important. I spent much time on this. Next up is tuples. Now tuples are like more like lists, but they are secure lists because we could change, slice and index in lists, but we cannot do that in tuples. Also, I'll just show you when I said lists allow the item assignments, it does not give an error, but tuples will. I'll just show you here. Okay. So you can see tuple 0 is 1, but what if I want to store tuple 0 rather than 1? I want to store it as -1. It will give me an error because tuples does not support tuples. They don't support item assignment. We have already seen this error in strings. So by now we have seen strings, we have seen lists, and we have seen tuples. Lists are mutable. We can modify lists. Tuples and strings, they are not mutable. Okay. So tuples are a secure way to store data. They help prevent modification. They are immutable. Okay. I have done this error just for one more example. Okay. So that completes lists and tuples for us. I'll just collapse these. Let's move forward and talk about just two more data types. One is sets. So sets are they are very unique in the way I have recently used sets in a machine learning project very recently, because there will be very frequent cases in your data science projects where what will happen is you will have a long collection of data, and what you want to do is you want to find out what are the unique kind of classes in that data. Suppose we have let's say we have uh, a list of 1,000 names. Okay, a list of 1,000 names of animals. Suppose we go to a forest, we collect the data from that forest, all the animals that we see in a day, and we store that data in a list. Now that's a list of 1,000 animal names, and then we provide the list to our supervisor. Now our supervisor wants to see how many unique animals did we find in a day. Now, if he keeps on looking at one by one, that does not make sense. That wastes his time. What he can do is he can use the sets theory. He can use the sets data type. What sets help us with is they always store unique information only. You will never find repetitive information in the set. So you can see duplicates is a list I have created. You can see 1, 2, 2, 3, and it has a lot of duplicate values. Okay, exactly the example that I gave you. Once I place this duplicates kind of thing inside a set, you can see all the duplicates are removed, only unique ones are stored. Okay, so that is the advantage. And this theory, when we convert a particular data type to another data type, it is called typecasting. You can always do it. Okay, suppose now I will introduce you. It is the typecasting concept is very important when we take a user input. Okay, let's do a user input. How we do a user input in Python is, suppose I want to ask for a number. Okay, I want to ask for a number. We do the input statement. Okay, we say enter a number, sir, with all due respect. So what that will do is that will ask us for a number. Okay, so let's say I provide 5 and I press enter. Now once I do that, in the next code, if I run the number, you can see number is stored in this quote marks. So that creates a problem because I cannot square a string. That gives me an error. I cannot square a string. I cannot do that because does not make sense. You cannot square something which is not a number. So what we have to do is we have to first convert this into a number. So what we can do is we can provide float at the outset of this. So this is called typecasting. We are taking whatever is taken in the input statement, it is always taken in the format of a string. Once you have taken it in a string, you convert it to a floating point number or any integer type number, you store it in a variable, and then once you square it, so I will do 5 again, and now if you run this, you can see 25 is coming. So you will find this error every time you do the input statement because this error happened. I have learned this concept by facing a lot of errors myself. So always remember, if you are using an input statement in your code, always remember you always have to convert the number into a float explicitly by using typecasting. Okay, we can convert lists into tuples, lists into other things. We can convert a string into a number or things like that. We can convert a number into a string and a lot using typecasting. Okay, last but not the least, we have dictionaries, and they are more like the data frames for, or the tables, or smart buckets for uh, the beginners. While the lists were like buckets with no names, dictionaries are a bucket of buckets, each having a name. I should repeat this statement. Dictionaries are like buckets of buckets, each having a name. So there is a bucket of apples with a name tag on it called apples. There is a bucket of tigers, the name tag on it called tigers. There is a bucket of, let's say, toys with a name tag on it called toys. And you take all these buckets and store it in curly braces, that becomes a dictionary. In Python terms, you have a list of porosities called poro. You have a list of permeabilities called perm. You have the reservoir name called R name, and you store all these informations inside curly braces. You call it a dictionary. Now let's unfold the secret, and there you go. I have a reservoir one. It has porosity data. It has permeability data. I can store the porosity data in the format of a list. I can give it a name. I can store permeability data in the format of a list. I can give it a name. And this is the typical syntax. Okay, so this is one named bucket that I was talking about. This is another name bucket I was talking about. And I have provided both of them inside a curly brace, a set of curly braces. And I have stored them. So now reservoir one becomes my dictionary data type. If I want to check what data type it is, I can just do it by this type reservoir one. It is a dictionary. All right, so that gives me it is more like a table, right? You can already imagine phi is more like a column name, and this is more like the data inside that column. K is more like again a second column name, and this is more like the data inside that column. Okay, and if in case all the data is, you are planning to keep it in a table, you can also do it. You can also do it in the future. You can see I have converted. So this is a task for the future. It's optional. You can just do it by a small command. You can convert a dictionary into a table. Okay, so this is exactly the, so this is for next lecture, but I'm just giving you a heads up what you can do with dictionary. So in a dictionary, if you want to access something, like in list you have to provide indexes. In a dictionary, if you want to access something, you provide in the square brackets, you provide the keys. Okay, these are called keys, whatever you see in orange, and whatever is stored after the colon, they are called values. Okay, so dictionary syntax is always like dictionary name equals to square this curly braces, key one, value one, then key two, value two. And these values are more like variables that are having their own values, like they are having their own data. Okay, always remember the keys have to be secure data types. Strings or tuples are good options to use keys, but you cannot use a list in the place of key, because it does not make sense. Something which has to be a name of a column, you don't want it to be changed in the future or messed with in the future. So that is why you always keep strings. It's a very popular practice to keep the dictionary keys in the format of string data type, right? You are seeing in this green because it's a comment. So what if I want to access this porosity data, reservoir one, phi, you provide this comment, this key value inside the square bracket. You can see whatever was stored as a value of this key is provided. Similarly, you can access all the keys in the dictionary. If it's a huge dictionary, you can do reservoir one dictionary name dot keys function. It's called a method. Whatever you see at the end like this, it's called a method. Okay. If you want all the values, you can do this as well, right? So this we have already seen. So that completes dictionaries for us. And finally we can go on to like operators and statements. So these are very, I'll just run through them very quickly, very self-explanatory. So in Python, what we do is, if in case we compare two qualities, there are only two results out of that condition. Either it's a true or it's a false. So it's a Boolean kind of response. Okay. So one is greater than true. Is it or is it not? It is not. So the answer is false. So I can just run it and you can see the answer is false. Okay. 2 is greater than 1, true. 1 is equivalent to 1. Always remember, try to speak of it like equivalence rather than equal to, because equal to you will confuse with item assignment. Okay. So 1 is equivalent or comparable to 1. Yes, it is. So it gives us true. 1 is equivalent to 2. It gives us false. All right. 3 is greater than equals to 1. True. 1 is greater than equals to 3. False. Moving on, logical operators. Suppose we want to combine 2, 3 conditions. Suppose I want to say, if the person's name is Divyanshu and he understands Python, then he's a rock star. Otherwise, he's nothing. Okay, something like that. If a rock's name is sandstone and its porosity is 30%, then it's a great prospect. So something like situations where we have to look at two conditions and it's very necessary that both these conditions give us a true, then only we execute the third condition or a particular set of steps. Then we use the AND operator. In that case, where we have to use, there will be cases where we are okay with either of the conditions. Okay, either you should do this or you should do that. Either you are experienced enough or you are skilled enough, you are getting a job. So that gives you OR statement, where either of the conditions, if they result true, suppose this statement, both of them have to be true, and then we will operate the next steps. In OR statement, either can be true. That's also okay. Not statement, not 0 gives you 1. It's more like converting things into the opposite. Not 1 gives you 0. Is statement. Typical use of it is 1 is 2, false. 1 is 1. 1 is 1, true. Very simple. Now, where do we need to use all these conditions that we have seen? We have to use them in if-else statements. These are called the flow control statements. In Python, what we have is, we have to control a set of actions based on a set of conditions. If today is a rainy day, I will take my umbrella with me. If today is a sunny day, I will also take my umbrella with me. If today is a stormy weather, I'll stay home, right? So in this case, I have to use if else kind of statements. So if 1 is equals to 2, print first. If 3 is equals to 3, print middle. If otherwise, print last. Okay. So in this case, what you can see, this condition is false, right? So the loop will, the control will not enter this block of code. In Python, a block of code is always given by indentation. You can see the space over here. Okay, this space tells us that whatever is in this indentation belongs to this line of code. It is independent of other sides of code. Okay, this part of code is independent to this part of code. It's this block. It's like an independent block. This entire thing. This is also an independent block. And in order to enter to the first print statement, you have to satisfy this condition. In order to enter to the middle print statement, you have to satisfy this condition, and so on. So it's very, very self-explanatory. Even in case you want to look at an example, you can go on. So finally, we come to the most applicable part of today's explanation, which is using all these understandings to loops or iterations. Okay, so there are two kinds of loops in Python. Loops is more like something we have to do repeatedly, right? So that's a loop. So for example, we have a list and we have a data container and we want to print all the information that is there in that container. So you can do that using a for loop. So for name in lists, print the name. So what this command will do is, it will look for name in lists. So lists is a list. So it will look at the first name in list, print the first name. Second name in the list, print the second name. Third name, print it. Fourth name, print it. As soon as it encounters the last element of the list, it gets out of the list. So it does whatever is pressed over here. Whatever is typed over here, it will run that command. Okay. But first it will run this command multiple times till it exists at the end of the code, end of the list. Okay, so that's the benefit of for loops. So I'll just explain a practical application of for loop just in a while. Similarly, you have a list of numbers from 1 to 9. You have to print whether each of these numbers are even numbers or odd numbers. So for n, so this can be any variable. This does not have to be, and so you can take I, X, Y, Z, whatever random. It's like a placeholder. Okay. For n in this list of numbers, if n is in this list of numbers, which means that if you are still not reaching the end of the list, go inside this for loop. If the modulo n modulo 2 gives you 0, which means that the remainder is 0, you print it's an even number. Otherwise, print that it's an odd number. Okay, and once you run that, you can see what for 1 it is printing odd, for 2 it is printing even, and so on. Very understandable. While loops, they are different than for loops because they keep on running as long as a particular condition is satisfied. So there is an item assignment first, I equals to 1. Now enter the loop body. First, it will check whether this condition is satisfied. I is less than 5, 1 is less than 5. Yes, it is. Enter the loop, please. Do whatever is inside the loop. I is 1. You just print the current value of I. Then go back. Update the I value. I equals to I plus 1. Your I now becomes 2. You check 2 is less than 5. Yes, it is. Do it again. Update the I value. 3. 3 is less than 5. Yes, it is. Do it again. 4 is less than 5. Yes, it is. Do it again. 5 is less than 5. No, it is. Get out. So you can see only up to the fourth part we have run the while loop, right? Now this is an optional part, range function. What if you have to do a same task, which you already know? What if I want to hear my name 10 times? What if I want to hear the same song 10 times? So what I can do is I can provide a range command. Okay, range is more like a hidden list. It's like a temporary list which is discarded off right after for loop is completed. Okay, so what it will do is it will print I, in this for loop will print I. How many times? It will print I 10 times. Okay, suppose I want to, let's say I want to say hey 10 times. Okay, print hey 10 times. So let's say I want to print hey 10 times. So you can see 10 times. What if I want to print hey 200 times? Okay, 200 times will be too much. So let's say 50 times. So you can see hey is printed 50 times. So that's the benefit of range command. It's like it's of no use beyond the for loop. Okay. Now we move on to functions. Do we have time? I would like to check. Do we have time after, like, I'll need after this, we just have projects. So can the host please tell me if we have time, 15-20 minutes, or is it anyone? Hello? Hello?
Hello, I think we don't have a lot of time left, but go ahead.
Okay. Okay, so next part of the scene is functions. I told you in the beginning that functions will be very important because they help you write clean codes. For someone who writes codes using functions, people who read that code, they trust that person because it is the task of a mature programmer. You write the code in form of functions because you already know that you want to make your code usable. You want to make it reusable. I'll give you an example. So first we'll look at the syntax of a function. You have to have a mandatory def keyword at the beginning. Then you provide a function name based on whatever you want. Then in this, you can provide whatever inputs you want to provide your function. Then inside this body, again, you can see an indent. You provide whatever things you want to operate inside a function. Then there can be an optional return statement at the end of a function, if in case your function wants to return something. Suppose in my code, I have multiple cases where I would want to square a number. So in that case, what I would do is I would take in that number, I would square the number and return the square of it. Now what that does is once I do that, I don't have to do this entire long thing again. It's a very simple example, but you can upscale it to very complicated examples. I'll just show you. So all I have to do, suppose I want to square, let's say I want to square 17. So I just provide inside, you can see squarer is my function's name. It is returning 17, and whatever is returned, I can store it in a variable. Okay, so you can see result is 289. Suppose I want to square 10, the result is 100. So I didn't have to type this thing again and again. I just had to use this function and vary my inputs and I will get. So it becomes more versatile. My code becomes more versatile, right? Next up, we will see another example. Suppose I want to do a function which takes in the number as well as the power. It is even more versatile, okay? So suppose I want to provide the power as well and the number as well. Suppose I want 625 and I want to do a square root of 625. So I can do a function with name power. The function name can be anything, does not have to be standard. You provide a number and you provide the power, and the result you can do and return the result. And you can see it does whatever you see. So that explains what functions can help us with. And then we move on finally. That completes our understanding of all the things we require for basic Python. And we are ready to do projects with Python. Okay. So first we will do a few projects, very simple, quick projects using functions. Then we will do projects using iterations, and you will have a homework assignment so that you can practice on your own if in case you want to, right? So in reservoir engineering problems, a lot of times this term you can see. So what if in my code, rather than typing this entire thing again and again, or taking user input again and again whenever I want to use this uh, uh, thing, for those who know well test analysis, this might seem more relevant problem because it's like a dimensionless pressure kind of thing for steady state. So in that case, I can create a function that whenever the user input is required, we can just call that function, find out this slope value, and then multiply it with delta p and find the flow rate. Okay, I'll just show you how you can do that. So in this slope command, we can see I have created a slope command. What I mean by slope is this entire thing, kh by 141.2 mu b ln re by rw. And inside this function, whenever this function is required, what this function will do, this function will take in k, h, mu, and b as the user input, and it will return this entire calculation, this entire thing. Whatever this function returns, you just multiply it with the drawdown delta p, and that will give you the flow rate. Okay, so this entire chunk of code is now converted to just this line of code, and that you can use 1,000 times in the future with just this, and very understandable. Okay, so you just provide delta p 500 and you just run it. Okay, you just run it. Let's say enter the permeability, let's say 150 millidarcies. Enter the h, let's say 30 feet. Enter the viscosity, let's say 100 centipoise. Enter the formation volume factor, let's say 1.12. The flow rate at, because we already provide delta p, the flow rate at 500 psi drawdown is 284. That's all very simple because of a function. Okay. Now, suppose we have a function to find API gravity. We have to provide specific gravity to it, and it returns API gravity. Okay, you can see API 1 gives me 10. So that becomes the API gravity of water. Now, for functions which are very simple, rather than typing, we can even more simplify it to something which is called a lambda function or an anonymous function. So whatever you can see, it is very simple. It is very convenient to do this. Whatever is taken as an input in this function in the bracket, it is taken here. You have to provide the keyword lambda here. You provide the user input placeholder over here, and then whatever you want to operate and return, you provide it over here. Okay. So what this statement means is, take the user input, store it in SG, operate this scenario, and whatever is selected, return this, and store it into the variable called API. Okay. So let's say I want to do the API gravity of oil which is having a specific gravity of, let's say, 0.8. Again, you can see even with the lambda function it works. So there are two approaches. You can either go with the functional approach, or you can go with a single line approach. As you get more and more experience in programming, you will tend to use lambda functions more and more because they look very fancy and very simple. Okay. Mini projects too. Now it's a project where we use iterations to solve our various problems. Okay. Now this chunk of code is very optional for this today's class. It's just to visualize something. Suppose I have a sinusoidal curve and I have another function which is a straight line. I want to find out the square, like wherever these two functions intersect. Now these, one is an algebraic equation, another is a trigonometric function, and I want to find out where these two guys intersect. Now, this is still solvable, but it's not that straightforward. Analytical solutions would be to just go on and try to, put them together, sin x equals to x or something, or and try to solve it. But we have another technique which helps us solving these transcendental equations, which is called Newton-Raphson's method. In that, what we can do is, the step one is to suppose this is our equation. We take everything to the left hand side, formulate a function fx, so that on the right hand side everything is zero. So we find out such a function fx, which is a combination of all the expressions. Then we apply this update rule, and we repeat this update rule till we have converts to a singular value of this x. Okay, so we will ask the user for the initial value of the root, and then we will update that rule till the point that we see no more change or no more improvement in the value of x. Okay, and what x is? It is our attempt to find out the root. And I have solved exactly that using the functions and lambda functions and loops. Let's see how I have done that. Okay, so first we will have to, what we will have to do is we will have to create a function. From our understanding, we will have to create the function, right? Then we have to ask the user for the initial guess of the root. Suppose I see the graph of this function and I think the root lies close to -2. More close the initial guess is, faster you will converge to the final solution. But since it's a computer, we can use any form of initial guess as we need. Okay, so once we take the initial guess from the user, we put it at the xn. Then we ask the user, we have to calculate the differential, first differential. Then we have all the things we need, and then we have to place this thing inside the loop, and we have to run that loop maybe 1,000 times, 10,000 times, whatever. Okay, so I have created a lambda function for the function, which is sin x. I have imported math library. So it is a library which helps you to do sinusoidals and trigonometry and exponentials or whatever you want. So you have a lambda function. Okay, what it lambda function does is it takes x0 as an input and does a 1 plus x0, because my straight line was 1 plus x and my sinusoidal curve was sin x, and I have to find the intersection of both of these guys. So sin x equals to 1 plus x. So I take everything to the right hand side. So my fx becomes 1 plus sin x, 1 plus x minus sin x equals to 0, right? So my fx is 1 plus x minus sin x. So I have created exactly in Python. This is my handwritten, and this is my Python version of the same. Similarly, I have also created differentiated. So differentiation of, so differentiation of 1 is 0, of x is 1, and of sin x is cos x. So I have also created a lambda function that does exactly this. Okay, and then I have taken the initial guess, which is 0, x0, and I have taken the initial guess as 1. And then I have tried to run this loop. I have told you about the range command. Let's say we run the loop over 100 iterations. I have applied the Newton-Raphson's concept here. You can see x new is equals to x old minus fx upon f dash x. Okay, and then this code runs 100 times, and finally whatever is the final value of this root, we store it in a root variable, and you can see this is the root variable minus 1.93. Just for verification, we can go and this line we can run. This line has the latest value of root, and you can see it is very, 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 very close or almost the actual value of root. Okay, now we can also verify this. So math of sine of root is minus 0.89, and 1 plus, okay, this is old, I guess. Math of sine of root is minus 0.93, and 1 plus root is also minus 0.93. So basically both the expressions are giving you the same value at a particular x value, which is the root that defines what a root is, right? Basic math. So that is the application of roots and iterations and basic lambda functions, everything combined in the mathematical problem. Similarly, you can apply the same concept to finding the square root or a cube root of a number. I have done the cube root over here. You can go back, look at this entire thing and do the homework assignments next. So there are two typical homework assignments you can do. You can do this thing for finding the square root of a number using Newton-Raphson's method. And finally, once you understand everything, you can move on to solve the typical, my favorite Klinkenberg effect problem, which is there in Tariq Ahmed using Newton-Raphson's method. Okay, so that ends today's session, and I'm all about questions now. For whoever wants to learn even more details about these concepts, I've provided the link. It's called w3schools.com, and you can learn whatever you want from there. I've also provided the link to my old playlist, Petroleum from Scratch playlist for YouTube, that is also available. And once the session ends, I will provide the link for my GitHub repository as well, wherever I've stored this. So yeah, any questions, I'm happy to answer now. So are there questions in the chat?
Thank you so much, sir, for this awesome Python training. Dear participants, if you have any question, write it down in the chat box. Mr. Vyas, I already have a few questions for you. Is the Newton-Raphson method can handle all the nonlinear equations or has limits?
If I heard it right, the question is, okay, can the Newton-Raphson method handle all the nonlinear equations, right?
Or has limits?
Or
has limits?
Or has limits?
Yes.
Yes, Newton-Raphson method is like, it can handle almost every expression there is. Given that you can code it in Python, you have to know, for example, in well-test analysis, there's an exponential integral expression, right? So there are two complex formats which I have not found out how to write them or code them in Python. But if your function is very non-linear, that does not make a difference. But the only drawback of Newton-Raphson's method is it will not converge for a function which is very horizontal, because you remember the formula for Newton-Raphson, it is x nu equals to x old minus fx upon f dash x. So the denominator is f dash x. So f dash x is more like the slope of the function. So if in case in the proximity of the root, the slope of the function is 0, which means that the function is almost horizontal or parallel to x-axis, the Newton-Raphson method will not converge very quickly. It will take a longer time to converge to your root. But today, that does not make a difference because we have great computers. So I have also explained the slight problems that Newton-Raphson has, but as per textbooks and literature, it will always help you solve the problems. So yeah, you will not find a case where it does not create issues.
Thank you for answering us. I have another one. Can we make changes on dictionaries variable content?
Yes, you can add a new key and a new set of values to dictionaries. Yes, you can do that. Dictionaries allow you, just that dictionaries don't have any particular order because they are more based on keys. But yes, you can always create, you can always do that. You can change the dictionaries. Yeah.
Another last question, if you would like it.
Sure.
Is the letter F that you have used to display the actual name is specific only to Colab or for any other aid?
No, it works everywhere. It is specific to Python and it works everywhere. It's a formatted string for Python. Yeah, it works everywhere.
And one last question. Is the default, what is the default value for round?
What is the default value for round?
Yes.
I guess it's 2, but I don't suggest remembering these things. You can always go and check, but I guess it's 2 for rounding up to 2 decimal places. Yep.
Thank you so much, sir. I think that's it. There's no other questions. If you want to give them the link where they can find this awesome course, I give you the mic.
Yeah, I will just share the link for this place and before I am. Yeah, just a second. I'll share the link in comments. I've shared a link in the comment. Can you please check if it's accessible? Once it is, I'm good. Can you open the link? Is it open?
Where did you share it, sir?
I shared it in the chat box. Okay, just try to.
I think it's not appearing in the discussion box.
Oh, okay, I'm sending it to a particular person, I guess. Yeah.
Maybe.
Just a second. Yeah. Yeah. Now you can see it.
Yes, now it's apparently very good showing. Good. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Yeah, you can access the link, right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, great session. Thanks a lot. I loved it speaking.
Thank you, everyone, for attending our Zoom session. And thank you for you, Mr. It was awesome. I would just like to make a small reminder for you, dear participants.